The courtroom was silent, so still that you could almost hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. On April 13th, 2015, Jodi Arias stood before Judge Sherry Stevens, her expression unreadable, her fate moments away from being sealed forever. She thought the story was over, but the real punishment was only beginning. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the shocking real stories we uncover every week. Cameras that had once obsessed over her every smirk and tear now pointed one last time, waiting to capture the moment her story would officially end, or so everyone thought. The words came down heavy and deliberate, each one cutting through the air like a verdict on her soul. Life in prison, no possibility of parole, no second chances, no escape. The judge made it clear Jodi Arias would spend every remaining day of her life behind bars until her natural death. For some, that sentence felt merciful. For others, it was far crueler than anything the death chamber could deliver. When the gavel struck, the world seemed to exhale. After years of trials, lies, tears, and televised confessions, Jodi Arias was gone from public view. But behind the steel doors of the Arizona State Prison complex in Perryville, her punishment was only beginning. Out there, the media lost interest. In here, she was about to live through a version of justice that few could imagine. Slow, suffocating, and endless. Her new world was concrete and metal. A cell roughly the size of a walk-in closet. 86 square feet of silence and regret. Inside, a thin mattress on a steel bed frame, a toilet bolted beside a small sink, a metal desk that might as well have been an altar to monotony. No windows with sunlight, no sound of life beyond the walls. Only the mechanical rhythm of doors, locking and unlocking. The echo of footsteps in the corridor. The occasional murmur of other inmates who already knew her name. For the first 2 years, Jodi lived under maximum security. 23 hours a day sealed in that cell, 1 hour to walk in a cage under a pale Arizona sky. For many, death would have been kinder. But this was the kind of punishment that eats away at the mind, day after day, until even silence becomes unbearable. People believed that once the cameras turned off, Jodi Arias disappeared. The truth is, that's when her story turned darker. What came after the trial wasn't peace or redemption. It was the slow, grinding reality of living every second with the memory of what she'd done. After sentencing, the state wasted no time transferring Jodi Arias to her new home, the Arizona State Prison complex in Perryville, a sprawling fortress of concrete and steel baked under the relentless Goodyear sun. It wasn't just another correctional facility. This was a place designed to break the spirit before it ever touched the body. Her first stop was the Lumley Unit, named after a correctional officer murdered by inmates back in 1997. Even the name carried a warning. This was not a place for redemption. It was a place of survival. Inside Lumley, the rules were simple. Speak little, trust no one, and remember that the walls had eyes. The cell she entered measured less than 9 feet across, barely enough space to stretch her arms without hitting cold steel. The air inside was thick, stale, and heavy with despair. There was no privacy, just the sound of coughing, metal doors clanging, and the occasional scream echoing from another block. This was where Jodi Arias began her new life, stripped of makeup, freedom, and every ounce of control she once craved. For 2 years, she remained in maximum custody, 23 hours a day, locked inside that concrete box. The lights flickered on at the same time each morning. Meals were passed through a narrow slot in the door, the same bland tray, the same routine. The human mind wasn't built for that kind of sameness. Every day bled into the next, until even time lost its meaning. But then something changed. Jodi was slowly moved down the chain, from maximum to close custody, and eventually to medium. That meant more movement, a cellmate, and the chance to interact with other inmates. For most prisoners, that would have been a small mercy. For Jodi Arias, it was a new kind of torment. She wasn't just another inmate. She was the inmate. The woman whose face had been plastered across every TV screen, whose trial had played like a twisted soap opera. Everyone knew her story. Everyone had an opinion. In a world where reputation meant survival, her notoriety was both armor and target. Every glance in the yard, every whisper in the cafeteria carried weight. Was it curiosity, contempt, or something worse? In prison, alliances shift like sand, and for someone as infamous as Jodi Arias, the most dangerous thing of all wasn't isolation, it was being seen. By the third year, Jodi Arias had learned the rhythm of prison life, the way mornings began with the clang of doors, how the guards' footsteps echoed before every count, and how whispers could spread faster than contraband. But no matter how long she'd been there, she never blended in. She couldn't. She was infamous, and in Perryville, fame wasn't a blessing, it was bait. Some inmates saw her as a celebrity, a curiosity to be observed. Others saw her as a murderer who'd escaped the death penalty she deserved. Every interaction carried an undercurrent of danger. A wrong look, a casual word, it could all ignite something she couldn't control. Still, Jodi tried to adapt. She volunteered in the prison library, spent hours sketching portraits and joined the choir, her voice echoing softly through the sterile halls. It was her way of clinging to something human, something that reminded her she was still alive. But even those small comforts came with a cost. Rumors spread fast, claims that she was manipulative, that she used her charm on guards and inmates alike, just as she'd once used it on the outside. The truth? No one could say for sure, but one thing was clear. Jodi Arias never stopped trying to control her narrative. She started writing letters, granting occasional interviews, speaking about her art and her spiritual journey. She wanted the world to see a woman transformed, not a killer consumed by guilt. Yet behind closed doors, fellow inmates told a different story. They said she was cold, distant, calculating, that she studied people, mimicked kindness, and withdrew the moment she sensed weakness. Some described her as polite but emotionless, a woman who could talk about anything except the one thing that had defined her life. In Perryville, everyone carried secrets, but Jodi's was heavier than most. The murder of Travis Alexander wasn't just a memory, it was the shadow that followed her into every meal, every conversation, every sleepless night. The guards didn't look at her without remembering the photos, the testimony, the brutality. The other inmates didn't forget either. When she walked through the yard, conversations would stop. Eyes followed her. Even years after her trial, her presence drew tension like static in the air. Some inmates tried to befriend her, hoping for protection or notoriety. Others wanted to provoke her, to see if the woman they'd watched on TV would crack. And in moments of quiet, when the cell block fell still, Jodi had nowhere to hide from the silence. Because in that silence, she could hear everything, the past, the regret, and the truth that even life itself had become a kind of death sentence. Life inside Perryville wasn't just punishment, it was transformation, forced and merciless. Over time, the media's spotlight faded, and the world outside moved on. But inside those walls, Jodi Arias became part of a different kind of story, one written in routine, control, and quiet endurance. Her days began before dawn, when the guards shouted for count. She'd rise from her narrow bunk, the same thin mattress that had molded to her body after years of restless nights. She'd fix her bed perfectly tight, not out of pride, but necessity. Order was survival. Discipline meant control. In a place where freedom no longer existed, routine was the only power she had left. Meals were silent, predictable. Powdered eggs, instant coffee, the hum of the fluorescent lights above. She'd sit among dozens of women, some broken, some bitter, others numb from decades inside. Most avoided her gaze, but some couldn't resist stealing glances. She was still Jodi Arias, the woman who'd captivated a nation. The fascination hadn't died, it had just turned into something quieter, darker. Inmates who came and went told stories about her to the outside world, about how she kept to herself, how she drew portraits for commissary credit, and how she occasionally gave advice to newcomers. Some said she was calm, almost unnervingly so. Others said she was manipulative, using her intelligence and composure to stay above conflict. But those who spent time near her noticed something else. Moments when her mask slipped. There were nights when her voice could be heard softly singing to herself, almost like a lullaby. There were days when she'd sit by the window of the day room, staring through the small reinforced glass at the endless desert beyond the fences. The horizon never changed, yet she looked at it as if searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe freedom, or maybe just meaning. But forgiveness never came. The families of Travis Alexander never forgot, and neither did the public. Every letter she wrote, every interview she gave, was met with anger and disbelief. To them, her life in prison wasn't punishment enough. It was too easy, too ordinary compared to the horror she had caused. Still, the years kept passing. Slowly and visibly, her face changed, less makeup, more lines, eyes dulled by time. The woman who once smiled for the cameras now looked like a ghost of her former self, and yet deep down she was still fighting, if not for freedom, then for control over her own story. Because even in the confines of her cell, Jodi Arias refused to be forgotten. Years inside Perryville began to reshape Jodi in ways no one could have predicted. The endless monotony, the stale air, the absence of color, it all wore her down, stripping away the vanity, the composure, and the quiet arrogance that once defined her. Yet even as her world shrank to the size of a cell, her name still carried weight beyond those walls. Occasionally, letters would arrive, some from people who despised her, others from those who claimed to understand her. Supporters, mostly strangers, sent her money for commissary. Cards filled with sympathy, even marriage proposals. To the outside world, she remained a symbol, either of evil or fascination. Inside, those letters only reminded her of what she'd lost. Over time, Jodi tried to reinvent herself. She began teaching classes, tutoring other inmates in reading and writing. Some saw it as genuine, others as another manipulation, an act to maintain control or appear reformed. But perhaps even she didn't know which it was anymore. Inmates who crossed her path often described her as disciplined, quiet, but emotionally unreadable. She kept her circle small, avoided conflict, and maintained a kind of eerie composure that unsettled even the toughest women in Perryville. They said she could sit for hours sketching, lost in her own world, her pencil gliding across the paper as if nothing beyond that moment existed. But prison has a way of revealing truth, no matter how deeply it's buried. Behind the surface calm, there were cracks, small glimpses of the woman who'd once sat in court, smirking through testimony. Some inmates recalled nights when she'd wake up shouting, her voice trembling, as if haunted by something she could never outrun. Others said she'd go days without speaking a word, her face blank, her eyes distant. She was living in what many described as a slow-motion death, a life sentence that didn't kill instantly, but eroded everything piece by piece. Her friendships were transactional, her privacy non-existent, her reputation both her shield and her curse. And yet, even from that confinement, Jodi still tried to project control over her image. Through letters, art sales, and claims of spiritual growth, she painted herself as a changed woman. But those who saw her daily knew better. They saw a woman trapped not just by prison walls, but by her own past, her own lies, and the endless echo of one brutal night that could never be undone. Inside Perryville, time was her only companion. And with every passing year, it whispered the same truth, that sometimes life behind bars is far worse than death itself. A decade has passed since Jodi Arias was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison without the possibility of parole. The media no longer lines up outside Perryville, and her name doesn't make the evening news anymore. But within those concrete walls, her reality hasn't softened. It's only settled in. She wakes up to the same sound of steel doors slamming, the same cold air that never seems to warm, the same faces she's seen for years. Every day repeats like an echo of the one before. Breakfast at dawn, work detail, count, lights out. The outside world has evolved. Technology, headlines, faces. But Jodi's world remains frozen in time. her reflection tells the truth better than her words ever could. The once carefully groomed woman who charmed cameras with her poise is now pale, weary, and quiet. She rarely speaks to the press anymore. When she does, her tone is calm, rehearsed, like a person who's accepted her role in a story she can no longer rewrite. But deep down, those who've seen her up close say she carries a strange mix of denial and despair. It's as if she's living in two versions of herself, the one who still believes she was wronged, and the one who knows the world will never forgive her. Inmates who arrived years after her sentence sometimes ask what she was really like. The older ones simply shake their heads. She's not who she was, they say, but she's not changed either. Because in Perryville, time doesn't heal. It just wears you down until there's nothing left to fight. Occasionally, new reports surface about her prison art being sold online, or whispers about her working quietly in a library. But those flashes of her existence are fleeting. The woman who once controlled every detail of her image is now invisible, another inmate swallowed by the system she once believed she could outsmart. For Jodi Arias, death would have been an ending. But life in Perryville is something else entirely, a punishment that stretches endlessly, without drama, without applause, just silence. The kind that forces her to live every day with the memory of Travis Alexander, the courtroom, and the faces of those she can never escape, even in her dreams. In a way, the verdict had been prophetic. The judge hadn't given her death, but something slower, something colder. The kind of justice that doesn't end with a final breath, but continues, quietly, in a place where time itself becomes the cruelest warden of all. And that's the truth of Jodi Arias' life today. Not the courtroom drama, not the headlines, but the quiet reality of a woman living every day in a cell she built herself. Her story reminds us that sometimes justice doesn't come with a final act. It comes in silence. If you found this story haunting, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because every week we uncover the hidden truths behind the world's most shocking real-life cases.